Not been allowed in the library.
So yeah, no, that's what I had.
Board meetings, security met him at the
Got
door.
him at the door.
Took him to the board meeting.
Yesterday.
Is Alan joining us?
I have a classmate that lives behind him.
While he was in the middle.
Good morning, everyone. It being 9 o'clock on February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. We would like to call the Human Services Committee to order.
Allen, Kenyon, Lewis,
Lewis here.
Silva, Tarver,
Carver's here.
Linder, Surges,
Here.
Tepe.
Happy here.
We have 4 in-room presenting quorum. We're asking for permission for Silva and Tarver to join us remotely. Do we have concurrence on that? We do? Pardon me?
Someone's eating cereal.
Sorry about that. Not me. Okay, and Mr. Tepe, once again, we thank you as ex officio for being here and helping us obtain quorum, so. Approval of minutes from January 10th.
If we have a unanimous.
Mr. Kenyon, Ms. Lewis,
He's asking, Mr. Kenyon's asking for unanimous consent.
perfect.
Didn't you ask for unanimous
Yeah, I
consent?
did.
Okay,
No objection.
is that roll call?
No,
No.
without objection.
Action, we're moving on. Public comment, I'm not aware of anybody in the room or online. Monthly financial reports are on file. Although Kathy Hopkinson is here, if we have any questions. Ms. Labrillo, I am going to try and move you as quickly as possible through these, so if there's anything that's out of tolerance, I believe we have 2 issues to get to today that will probably consume a half an hour of debate, but we have a small group here today but a very educated group, and I look forward to that debate, but I'd like to give that as much time as possible.
There's nothing out of tolerance in the attached reports. I'd be happy to entertain questions if there are any. We have for a couple of months pushed off a discussion on risk management and preventable versus non-preventable. The reports were in the packet last month too. They haven't changed. We put them back in this month. If you'd like to have a discussion on that, we certainly can do that. If you would like to pass it to a future month, we certainly can.
I will leave that to the committee members to say, would we like to discuss that? But I think we have 2 heavy lifts that we need to get to today. Could we possibly come back to that if time permits?
There's absolutely nothing pressing associated with it except for a discussion about whether we want to add a risk manager position to staff in the next budget cycle. But again, we have some time and certainly can pass this off to a future month.
And if I could plant the seed on that, Ms. Hopkinson, during subsequent committees of the whole and possibly finance meetings, I have made the notion or asked of you, is there any quantitative measure, any way at all, to say, if we added a person or division or department line, how do we quantitatively measure the success in bringing down the budget? This is another one of those such items where adding this person is an immediate uptick in expenses, but the cost savings by this person is exponential. And again, I don't know how to I don't want to be the guy who's pigeonholed into saying, just keep adding staff. But I do want to say, listen, for every $100,000 if we do that, we save $1 million in risk. I mean, I don't know how to measure that.
The reports that we have in here are a metric for measuring that. They give a dollar figure on what we paid last year in preventable accidents and liabilities. That means that whatever happened was absolutely a preventable at fault expense as opposed to unpreventable. Deputy being attacked by an inmate, that's not preventable. There's nothing that any risk manager can do to prevent that. So we have been tracking and have lined out preventable versus non-preventable claims so that you can use that figure to quantify it. Certainly can't
Perfect.
control the other one, but you can control the preventables. So it does show that, and the reports are in there. If you'd like to review them, and I can certainly include them for a deeper discussion in a future month if you'd like, but there are, a few $100,000 in preventable accidents each and every year.
If I can just, if I may, Mr. Kenyon, Lewis, Tarver, Tepe, and if Ms. Silva is on the line with us, Dr. Silva, my question
here.
to my question to each of you is, I don't want to be the person pushing in this direction by myself. If there's a consensus here that we should be continuing this conversation, I would like to hear that, but Mr. Tepe's hand up.
Thank you, Tepe here. It's my opinion that the HR department is operating extremely efficiently because it's probably understaffed. And if you added a person in this risk area, which would probably save us money, okay? I'd be suggesting that a presentation initially to this group saying, okay, this is the justification for this person. This is what they would do. These are the additional things. Because you're really spreads pretty thin, in my opinion. So let's create some justification and begin to have some discussion associated with it. But if you can begin to present an argument, I mean, to me, in the violations area, we added 3 people to the staff upstairs on the 4th floor. And whether or not they paid for themselves, the fact that violations are now being taken care of and tracked, to me is a major thing, because those are the kind of violations that we all get calls about.
Yep.
So I think if you can present an argument for it, let's start here. And, if you want to get it up on the next cycle, next month would be the best time to come forth with a good presentation.
Vern, I appreciate that perspective. Anita, you had your hand up?
I'm a huge proponent of risk management. I've never been in an organization where we haven't had that position, and it more than pays for itself. So I'm absolutely on board with it.
Thank you for that. Anybody else like to comment on that or give direction? But I'm hearing and I'm feeling there's consensus. Thank
Silva
you.
agrees.
Mr. Tarver, I see your hand.
No,
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to agree with my other colleagues too. I feel that would be the best direction to go, and I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in.
Thank you, Bill. Jamie, does that give you what you need?
Yes, and for information, I just want to include, this would not be a general fund position. It would be an insurance liability position, so it wouldn't impact your general fund budget.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
That-
While you're standing there, compliance training.
Compliance training, we're getting full swing. We had a couple of snow days and we had a lot of people getting their sexual harassment training done during those snow days. So we're way ahead of the curve this year.
There we go. All right, item 9A. Let's get to the meat and potatoes here if we may.
I have a PowerPoint presentation if you'd like me to present some of the information that was requested in the last meeting.
Have at it.
All right.
So this, define the issue and the, what we're trying to achieve with this and.
So the background is we presented a resolution and there were some questions last time regarding requiring Illinois residency for county employees. The issue is a cost versus benefit analysis of employing people outside the state of Illinois. There are a number of complications in hiring outside the state of Illinois. We reviewed those in the last meeting, and then there were a couple of questions regarding contractors, what the cost would be, possible vendors. So we did some research in the previous month with the help of Kathy Hopkinson, and we made this PowerPoint to kind of answer some of the questions that came forward in the last meeting and continue this discussion. So the first slide I have is just a little bit about where we currently are, because I think it's helpful to know as we go forward. As of the time of preparation of this report, we had 1,337 county employees, not including election workers, and elected and appointed officials and board members. 67% of those employees live in Kane County. 30% live in a county that borders Kane County, and the remaining 3% live within 9 other non-bordering counties in Illinois. 5 current employees live out of state, and I have the states listed there. There's 1 in California, 1 in Minnesota, 1 in Indiana, and I believe 2 in Wisconsin. So those are our current out-of-state employees that we are currently managing. I looked into what other counties do in this space. DuPage County does not allow any out-of-state employees for any reason. Will County, I spoke with their HR director. She said that they had 1 such employee. It was a very special circumstance approved for that single case. They do not, as a rule, have any out-of-state employees. McHenry and Lake County permit Wisconsin. They do border Wisconsin, and each has 30 or 40 employees in Wisconsin. So they do manage as a 2-state employer. They do not allow employees outside of Illinois and Wisconsin.
Jamie, would you consider, I apologize, would you consider us close enough to Wisconsin that when you list of those 5, 2 are in Wisconsin, are they just over the border
Yes.
and it's a proximity issue, or are they in Oshkosh? I mean,
Well, I don't know where their individual employees live, but they are not, in Lake and McHenry counties, those employees live in Wisconsin, but work in office. So it's not a remote work
got it.
situation
Okay.
like ours would be, but because they actually border Wisconsin, it's a very commutable distance from Wisconsin
It's a
to their
much better
offices.
answer to a question I didn't ask. So that's perfect. Thank you.
None of these counties have any written ordinance or policy restricting that. That's just their general rule. So I don't have any actual laws or policies to share because none of them had anything in writing about this. They just received cooperation from their departments and elected officials. There are a lot of considerations that we did discuss last time, and just to kind of summarize, workers' compensation. If an employee lives in another state, they are still covered as workers' compensation. A remote worker who trips over a power cord in their home and falls would be covered by workers' compensation. And if an employee were to have a workers' compensation-based injury, we would need legal staff in that state to manage that workers' compensation. Unemployment insurance and management. Unemployment, we are self-insured for unemployment as well as workers' compensation. When we were dealing with Minnesota, we discovered that we're not a public employer outside of Illinois. Within Illinois, we're a public employer that gets us certain exemptions to be self-insured. We are not considered a public employer necessarily in other states, so we may need to pay unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance can vary, and I have a future slide on that. Payroll and income taxes, we do have to report to those states and make wage reports and process taxes for those other states. Wage and hour compliance, each state has its own wage and hour rules. Not all of them follow just the federal laws, but may have their own wage and hour laws, minimum wage laws, and other details to manage in payroll. Affordable Care Act, some states require Affordable Care Act filings. Our benefit provider can charge up to $1,000 per state to file additional Affordable Care Acts. There's also notices and postings. Each state has their own set of labor law posters that have to be sent to employees and have to be available to them. So there's a number of other compliance issues associated with different state laws. There's also employee communication issues. We really would have email as an exclusive method to, communicate with those employees since they're not in person. There's travel expenses associated with having an out-of-state employee. If you do need them to come to a meeting or something in person, that would be a qualified business expense. Employment law policy and compliance. There's inconsistency between state laws regarding employment policies, which would mean that we would need to have an employee policy handbook for each state with which we have employees. As you look at the variations in those, this board would have to make a determination if, for example, there's a variation in how much benefit time we have to offer, how they want to manage having employees with different benefits. It would be difficult to manage in our computer system as well as from a fairness standpoint. Also, if we're going to employ a large number of people outside of the state of Illinois, we need to look at whether our benefit program, which is Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois, our HMO only serves Illinois groups of doctors, and if we would want to look at expanding that benefit program, which may or may not be cost effective. There are benefits, when you are able to retain a qualified employee, you will save time from not having to transition, hire a new employee when an employee moves out of state. The employees that we currently have that are out of state, that is the situation that led to them. They were existing employees that moved out of state while working for us, and their managers wanted to retain them and retain their talent. They do often have extensive knowledge of county operations, and we're able to then retain that knowledge, long-term knowledge they have. The other benefit is it does offer a larger pool of candidates for hiring. So if you can post jobs nationwide and remote, it does give you more people to choose from. There are a lot of associated risks, though.
Jamie, if I can stop you 1 second. In my mind, and again, I think small on this. I am sort of putting these employees into two different buckets. The first bucket is that bucket where maybe an employee that has been with us longstanding is looking to move out of state. And I think the reference was Chief Judge came to us and said, spouse offered job in California, our employee needs to be with spouse, but the caseload files that they have within the court system are ginormous and will take 18 months to a couple of years to weed their way through. It is impractical for us to replace that person. Can we keep that individual on while their caseload tapers down? Versus we want to hire a new employee who doesn't ever want to be here, who has some unique skill set that we can't find that employee from anybody in the state of Illinois. And so we want that person even though they live out of state. To me, those are two extremely different scenarios. And as you're going through these benefits and risks, in my mind, I'm doing this dance of saying, which bucket do those go into? Because one, this is just me personally, I'm able to accept the one where the other one I'm not so accepting of. And I just wanted to acknowledge to everybody that in my mind, those two buckets exist. And I don't know, maybe there's a third bucket that somebody else has, but I just wanted to acknowledge that.
So,
Anita,
yeah, could we not make those 1099 independent contractors?
will you address that later in the slides?
We're gonna cover that in future slides. And to address your comment, Mr. Surgis, the
I
costs.
hate when you say that because I don't know if I'm in trouble when you're saying that.
The costs and the risks associated are the same regardless of how they came to the situation. So that's why we're presenting it as a single situation.
Okay.
As you look at solutions, this county can certainly choose to allow one of those scenarios and not the other. Either way, if you choose to allow this, you need to set parameters on it. You need to make sure that there's a review of the situation and that there's very defined this, we will allow it for this reason or for this type of employee that are pretty clear, because you don't want to open yourself up to discrimination concerns when one employee is allowed to do it and another is not. And we certainly can't transition all of our workforce remote. So there has to be very clear guidelines that determine when it's acceptable and when it isn't. So to your point of there being different situations, that is something that if this board would like to permit out-of-state employees on an ongoing basis, you would need to define.
Thank you. Mr. Kenyon.
I can't see why you'd allow travel expenses or at all for anybody that lives, let's say, out of county or let's say somebody lived in Rockford and had to commute down here. Why should we pay that person to drive here? And come on, nobody is that important except for yourself, of course. But nobody's that important. I can't see why we'd have to be bound to that.
I appreciate that perspective as well.
And we aren't bound to it. It's something you could certainly define in policy.
Yeah, that's what we should have, you have to, there'd be no travel expenses. But we had a person that lived in Rockford, and the state's attorney wanted to supply a car and a credit card and an iPass.
Can you pull your microphone up?
And so they could come from Rockford here, and I said, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, and he would come here and then go to appointments.
Mike, I might suggest that generationally, you and I are probably on the same page on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yet I think there's a whole generation, younger than us that has a very different view of that.
But do
And
they want to pay?
I'm just saying that, I think we need to just hear it out and then come to grips with how we want to handle that. But I'm not disagreeing with you. So.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that that is currently allowable under county policy. And if it's something you would like to not allow, that would require a policy adjustment.
There are days I really like you and days I
I'm
really
down with that. I'm good for that.
The day's young, Mr. Tepe.
Thank you. I feel our policy should be that we do not want any employees out of state. And I'm certain what will happen is when a situation occurs, a manager is going to come to the board with an exception. And then that board can decide what they want to do with that exception.
Oh,
But I think our policy should be simple and straightforward, and that is, we don't want any employees out of state. And that'll make life easy. Look at DuPage County, according to your report.
Everybody looks there and says how great they are.
I'm feeling a consensus, so
But whenever a manager has a situation, they are going to come before the board. And let's make them do that. Let's let the board decide. It's the
Well, yeah.
board's decision if they want to grant something like that.
thank you, Mr. Tepe. Mr. Roth, and then let's let Ms. Labrillo keep moving.
I mean, one comment, that department then should cover all the extra expenses. And then and then also we need to make sure that's reported, because if,
Board.
instead of coming out of your budget or whatever, because there's a cost to it, and if they want it, okay, well, put your money where your mouth is and then have it reported. And then, especially if it's as an example, if it's an elected official, then they take responsibility for spending that money. Right? Because you're saying it's not inexpensive. I don't like to use the word cheap, but.
And I'm going to review the costs. Part of the reason that's difficult is it's a compliance, so you have to put compliance time on it. But I'm going to there was a question last time regarding how exactly how much does it cost, and it's difficult to quantify. It's more of a per state cost than a per employee cost, because the work comes in as you add in a state. So if you have 50 employees in Wisconsin, that's still one state. And one state worth of costs. If you have one employee in each of the other 49 states, that's excessively expensive.
Right.
So, it really depends on how they're grouped. But I will go into that a little bit in a future slide.
Okay. And Mr. Roth, thank you for that comment. I want to acknowledge that we are trying to adhere to to my personal goals of saying, you know, we're not having conversations in a vacuum without finance being here. And Ms. Hopkinson, I thank you for being part of these discussions so that we're not going off reservation and just having you nodding or, you know, suggesting otherwise is great. And Christine, also thank you for being here. So Jamie, please go on to the risks.
The risks, and when you look at legal compliance, there's always time spent necessary to research. We are subject matter experts in Illinois law as we work with Illinois law regularly, but the laws do vary greatly from state to state, and we would need to research the whole of the employment law when we add a new state to find everything. So whether it's HR staff, that would involve, you know, the next one bullet point is state's attorney staff as well, as they do vet our policies for legal compliance. So that would increase their workload as well. The payment of payroll taxes to any other state is just an extra step. It is outside the routine processing, and anytime you add a special process, you increase the risk of problems. So as much as you can adhere to a standard process, that helps keep risk down. So for compliance and all of those pieces, as you add in additional processes, you add in additional risk. The policies in Kane County do ensure compliance with state of Illinois laws. They do not necessarily comply with the laws of other states. So we would need to prepare a handbook for each state and then maintain it. The employee's pay rate, you would have to look at adjustments of pay rates for cost of living. You'd have to have different rate tables in each state if you wanted to be consistent in your pay practices. Additionally, some states require more or less benefit time to be given. As you add more states, finding one policy that covers all those laws would be increasingly difficult, and you'd likely have employees having different benefits because they reside in different states, which again, greatly complicates your ability to be consistent in your pay and benefit practices. Employees unable to be physically available to other employees just does impact productivity in many cases. So as opposed to people that work a hybrid remote, not being able to be present at all certainly affects productivity and communication.
Jamie, of those 5 employees that you had mentioned, do those employees, are they a hybrid where they're here a couple days, gone a couple days, or are they point blank, I'm in California and I'm never coming here?
To my knowledge, they are all 100% remote, but I can't speak to that because I don't work with those employees directly.
Christine, could I ask that gentleman if there's something that he needed, or is he in the wrong committee, or does he need guidance someplace? Thank you so much.
So I can't really answer that for sure because I don't work with those
you.
employees directly. The cost estimate, again, I said it's very difficult to put an exact dollar amount on it because it really depends on how many employees are in each state. I looked at unemployment costs. It varies state to state. Usually its initial is based on 2 to 4% of the salary. It's variable depending on an experience rating. So the more filings you have, the higher your rate goes. Full possible ranges is 0 to 18%. I would imagine our experience rating would remain low. We don't lay off a lot of people. Workers' comp, also it's based on the total payroll and the experience rating. It starts at about $350 per employee. Those are for fully insured plans. So again, it's going to vary. If you have that one employee then trip on their cord and fall and get hurt, it's going to go through the roof.
Jamie, how many slides do we have total?
Not many. We're almost done.
Okay, I just want to make sure are we okay to read these on our own? Do we want Jamie to give the oral presentation? Do we want to stay high level? Do you want to get granular on
Bill
this?
says there's 10 slides.
There's 10 slides. She's on slide 5.
Okay,
If you'd like me to be a little more of an overview, I certainly can.
yes. No, stop that.
Thing to keep in mind, if you are going to do an updated handbook for every state, California alone had 20 employment law changes last year that would have required a handbook change. It was actually 24, I believe. So you as a board would be seeing all of those changes for every state. We did have a conversation with a payroll service provider. Kathy and I spoke with a representative from Kronos as to what services they can provide. They certainly can provide the wage and hour compliance as well as the payroll services. The cost is only a few dollars per employee per pay period. But they will not just do our out-of-state employees. We would have to transition
way.
to them as a payroll provider in order to do that. Huge project. It would take multiple years. It's not something that is out of the question. I think Kathy is reviewing that as a possibility. But it's a large project and would take a lot of research.
This was our ace in the hole. They won't do a partial.
They won't. We asked, we said there's about 5 of them there. They were kind of like, no, it's too big of an operation to take on just a few employees. I asked what a minimum would be and they said, really, we look to take on your entire employee base. I guess if I had to give a number, I would say 50 or so, to make it worth their while to even offer this to
And the
us.
insult to injury on this was some of these like ADP also provided the work comp component.
As well, Kronos did as well. And so
Okay.
they provided both the work the work comp and unemployment components. Now, I don't make no mistake, you would still have to pay your premiums and your insurance, but they manage the filing. So for a couple dollars per employee per month, they would manage all of your filings. They would not be providing handbook or employment law compliance services. Certainly the board's policies remain the board's policies and they don't provide that kind of service.
Thank you. Ouch.
Looking at costs, HR and state's attorney staff would be needed to manage that law compliance. Just as an estimate, looking at the amount of time we spend on compliance, I would say we would probably need 1 staff person for every 5 states we bring on. If you look at costs of salary plus benefits for an HR person who is able to address law issues, I think probably, you'd have to pay maybe $75,000 a year at least to get a person capable of doing that. With salary and benefits, you're looking at closer to $100,000. So I would say $20,000 per state for the compliance per year. Anytime you are non-compliant with those employment laws for any period of time, your risk of lawsuit and fines and liability goes up. We discussed the possibility of 1099ing employees. So we did some research. The source of this research is the IRS. You can read through these. It's not really an option to 1099 those employees. They don't qualify as contractors. I kind of brought my prop here for you. We were audited in 2016 for the tax years 2014 and 2015, and this is the result of it if anybody'd like to come and read through it. Audited by the IRS. Yes, the IRS audit. Yeah, not our regular auditors. I'm sure that's a larger staff.
That's pretty small for the IRS, actually.
They only did 2 tax years. So, that's the result of it. Just to kind of show you, I'll go back to some of these, but as a result of this audit, we paid $276,955 in back taxes. Those back taxes were for a few reasons, which are listed here. That does include some improperly classified workers who were classified as independent contractors and sent 1099s. But whether or not we 1099 them does not one of the factors in determining if they're actually a 1099 employee or a actual full employee. So I'll go back a little bit to what that test is. Among
Understood. Keep moving.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir. Mr. Shepro.
I was a question. I'm stunned is also since that time, the IRS has considerably tightened the regulations beyond what they were in 2016.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
They have substantially tightened them. Actually, it was just in January that that final guidance was released. So these slides are based on that new guidance that was released last month. Ultimately, a private contractor is there's these 6 factors that are listed in that second bullet point that really look at, so it's very subjective, but it's also very tight. That person really needs an opportunity for their own profit and loss. They control everything about their own work. We as the payer do not control the work. We only control the deliverable, the end product. Additionally, we can't be their only client or customer. They need to be operating a business that offers services to the public. So we can't be their only customer. That's another big one that really excludes the type of circumstance we're looking at in this instance. One of the other questions was about gig work. Gig work is specifically for activities done to earn income on demand, typically through the use of an app or digital platform. It was a definition created by the IRS to really cover things like DoorDash, Lyft drivers, as well as grant writers, web developers, and IT professionals using services like Upwork in order to find individual projects.
Jamie, will you be speaking to the contract employees or leasing?
I can certainly speak to that. I don't have a slide on it, but I can give you the information you need on.
Only because those are,
Agency, we call them
Yes.
agency workers. So they come to us through a leasing agency. And that is something that will cause you some difficulty with IMRF. IMRF doesn't like you outsourcing your employees. The reason our pension system functions and remains funded properly is because everyone participates and the county contributes for every employee.
so difficult or insurmountable?
Against IMRF's rules.
Perfect, thank you.
The slide that's up now is just more details on the contractor versus employee relationship. I don't need to go through and read this for you. You can certainly read it if you'd like. This presentation is posted outside the agenda on the webpage if you'd like to review it. I think ultimately, taking a deep look at it based on the circumstances, the issues we are looking at, a 1099 is not a viable solution. That is the end of my presentation.
All right, I'm going to take a minute here to, and Jamie, of those 5 employees, how many of those are in the employ of county offices versus departments?
I believe just one of them is in a county office, but I'm not 100% sure.
And in the notion of internal control, does this board, committee, blah, 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 board, have control of this? If we were to say our new policy is we don't do, does that mean the offices that have internal control need to comply with that?
So that is, an issue that would have to probably be further reviewed. Cook County has an ordinance that their elected officials follow that requires residency. They actually require residency within Cook County. Certainly our county isn't large enough to function in that way. So that seems to lean towards, yes, they would have to comply. In looking at cases that have happened in this state, there's one from a municipality, and there's a test to it. As long as the parameters that this board sets are reasonable and allows that elected official a reasonable opportunity to staff their office, then they could be upheld. If you were to, for example, restrict the coroner's office to only hiring people out of Campton Hills, certainly that would not provide him an opportunity to find staff, and then he would not have to follow it. So it's kind of certainly one of those things in which this board can state their
Test and
intent.
measure involved on that.
Correct.
Okay, again, my concern, my overarch on this is always, this is what we think is appropriate. Yet if an office with internal control does something differently and it's proven wrong, it comes back to this general board to make reparations on that. And I don't think that that's a fair thing, but that's just Cliff.
Correct. If an elected official were to hire an employee outside the state, not provide the proper legal compliance, or not follow the employment laws in that state, and a lawsuit resulted, this county would be holding the bill for that lawsuit.
Yes. Bill, 1 second.
Okay,
Um,
it's a clarification on your question.
Go ahead, please.
On the 5, none of them are elected officials, right? Departments?
4 of 5 are, but don't quote me on that. I would have to go back and review those
Okay,
employees.
thank you.
Okay. I want to provide the opportunity. We have some firepower online with us. And in these discussions, if Miss Molina, or Miss Strathman, would, if you have input or questions, we would love to hear them now while we're going through this preliminary research. And I invite you to speak up. Ms. Juby, are you okay with everything? Mr. Kenyon? Questions, concerns?
Well, I'm thinking, in Chicago, you have to live in Chicago to be a policeman or a fireman. And I know sometimes, here, they'll hire a fireman or a chief who lives an hour away.
Mhm.
And so you could have a time, you have to be able to be there within 10 minutes, because if you have an emergency, you can't wait an hour.
Understood.
So, I mean, but these people aren't like that, but people that have to be here, I'd be a little resentful that somebody else could do something I can't.
The argument that I hear over and over again behind the scenes here and offline is that the reason you need to go out of state or out of the area is because you can't find somebody qualified to do the job locally.
Baloney.
And I struggle with saying that in the entire state of Illinois, we can't find, but then we also want to say, listen, we're way at the northern end. So is it fair to say, are you kidding me? We're huge. How can we not find somebody to do this? Mr. Teppi, anything?
No, I think my earlier comments. stand
Agreed.
For what,
Ms. Lewis?
I'm good with the ordinance.
Okay. Bill?
I agree with Mr. Tep.
Chris?
Yeah, certainly. I wish I'd played more Dungeons and Dragons or something. There's so many things moving in here.
There are.
Yeah. Kudos to putting that all together. It's very
Jamie,
informative.
thank you again. We so,
The question I have maybe is more policy. I don't quite understand, or is about the policy. Or how we as a board or without getting too involved, like passing an ordinance and all that stuff where you have to do a handbook, how do we do a policy? Is there something that we could, that's been done before by setting a policy, by the board of setting a policy just amongst, who sets it? How big does it have to get? And how much teeth does it have? Does that make sense?
it does. And I'm going to make a generalized statement, and I don't mean to overstep, but so often this committee comes up with stuff that's some pretty heavy lifts that impact. I mean, it's just the pebble in the pond, but the ripples are enormous. And it seems like it's just a couple of us sitting here, on a Tuesday, or Wednesday morning. Unfortunately, the department becomes it gets villainized, and Ms. Labrillo bears the brunt of all this. And it's so not fair. And Jamie, this is a huge one. I mean, this sounds like this is just, oh, this is silly. Of course you should live here. Okay, but if you're that employee that's been working for us for 20 years, or you're that attorney who's carrying that caseload, or and you can come up with exception after exception. I think in general, what we're saying, and Bill, I see your hand. Give me 1 second. In general, what I'm saying is there's always going to be an exception. But by and large, we have to draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we believe in. So, Mr. Tarver?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you were kind of going to where I was going. And I believe everything that everyone's been shared. And Jamie, thank you for all the work. Clarification, I want to make sure I understand correctly. This would be a policy moving forward. Was it discussed, what would we be doing with those 5 employees that are currently employed out of state?
Within this, the very last paragraph of the attached ordinance is an exemption, a grandfather clause for those situations currently that are existing.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
I think also if you wanted to, this does not currently have an exception process written into it, but I'm hearing the board say that you would like a review process or an approval process for exceptions, which we can certainly write into it. You would just need to give me the information of who you would like to have approve those exceptions and any criteria you'd like on it, and I can certainly have that for the
Jamie,
next
what I
step.
think I'd like to, Anita, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was gonna say, I would rather start it off with no exceptions because of the fact, because then you're going into that favoritism and why does this employee and all that. We're just opening ourselves up for more. So I would say, don't put exceptions in.
I agree. If we're going to do it, we would need to include very clear parameters around that.
Ms. Strathman, and then I believe Madam Chair has just
Gimped up here.
come to the podium.
Uh,
Cheryl, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jamie just addressed what I was thinking was the grandfather clause. And I think that that's a way to cover for the employees, these 5 employees that already are living out of state, and then establishing a policy going forward that would not allow that, except for the exceptions, like you spoke about, somebody with a caseload that a spouse is moving to another state, and that scenario, that makes sense to me. So that's what I would think is the grandfather clause would cover some of these existing employees. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we go to Madam Chair, Jamie, how close is this ordinance that you're presenting to those other counties such as DuPage?
The other counties do not have anything in writing. They have just, this is the will of our board, and their departments and elected officials are cooperative in that.
Okay, Madam Chair?
Thank you. While I do respect our current 5 employees, I believe that they should be given an opportunity, maybe a year, to transition. That way they can either look for other employment opportunities in the state that they reside in, or relocate back here. I'm pretty conservative with this to Illinois, just to Illinois. I also think that if they're caseloads, if they're professionals such as attorneys, those caseloads can, instead of having continued caseloads, they can continue finishing their current caseloads and complete those. And then once those caseloads are completed, their responsibilities are completed.
Madam Chair, could I challenge you and give a timeline on that? 36 months, 24 months, 12 months?
That I would defer to the attorney. I have no idea what those caseloads could look like.
Mr. Shepro, might you have, my desire on this is momentarily to move this out of this committee with a positive vote, allowing it to circulate within the other committees so that if there's something that somebody would like to add to it, they can feel free. Jamie, where do you think this would go from here? Does this go straight to exec?
We would put it to finance because there is a payroll finance component, and I think that's also a good way to give it a wider audience.
Okay, because I think the offices of the state's attorney and the judicial departments would probably want to weigh in on this just because I think they've got the biggest employee base. Am I mistaken on that?
Yes, I would say your judicial and public safety partners probably have the largest of the
So
employee base.
I don't want to do this in a vacuum, but I want to allow them time to move in, to chime in, but I do want to move this out of here because this has been looming in the background. We're looking at it like some of you going, this is the first time. This is not the first time. This has been on our backs for 8 months and it's getting heavy. We need to move this. Ken?
Yeah, Shepro, Special Assistant State's Attorney. I'm not as conversant with what's been going on. I would strongly suggest, if it hasn't already happened, that before you start circulating it too widely, you work with the state's attorney's office. Madam Chair's point is a useful one in that you could, I think, appropriately have a phase out or an opportunity. You know, if you don't want to just say none, or you have to move back in by tomorrow, you could set that. I have some more familiarity with first responders because of my work with the fire districts. Generally, police and fire tends to be more authority within the state to restrict it for the reasons that were pointed out. but, the only time that I'm aware where the residency requirements has been thrown out is if there is alleged to be a racially or other discriminatory, either intent or impact. So for example, there were 20 years ago, a whole bunch of lawsuits filed against a lot of Cook County municipalities that had residency requirements that were alleged in federal court to have prevented minorities or other, groups from getting jobs as police or fire. But that's an exception. Most of those decrees have been worked through, settled, or no longer in force. But I think working with the state's attorney, and my personal legal opinion is DuPage ought to have an ordinance if they're going to have something as opposed to an ad hoc policy, because that's the way that you get sued, is to say you let this person get hired, but not that person. So
Understood.
I think you're on the right track.
So I would motion this forward, Surges, with the modification to the grandfather clause with a 36-month expiration of that grandfathering.
I will
And-
work on
and
an
I think-
edit for that for the next committee.
No, I'm motioning
Oh,
that now.
okay.
I'm motioning that change now and looking for a second. Ms. Lewis seconds, and we can move this on from here. And we're happy to, with the full resources of the Human Services Department, to work with any, whether it's finance or judicial or, anybody that would like to review this, we're happy to, but this is our starting point, and if, I think this is solid. So with that, is there any other discussion?
Just a clarification. No, yes. So during that 36-month period, if this passes through, what can happen in case there is an accident or we're not in compliance? Are we then liable for all of that? And during those 36 months, we will have to continue to hire somebody here, new hire, who would take care of those 5 employees to make sure that we are in compliance with a variety of different states they live in.
I did look into it in the couple of states that we have. There is no grace period. So we would be liable for anything that occurred in those 36 months in those states. We can try to mitigate that further with some review on we can do either hire a consultant or try to find the time to do those legal reviews with the state's attorneys of those states' employment laws and try to put in some temporary steps to manage those as much as possible in those
Jamie,
cases.
since we already employ those people, that's a great question, but the question should be directed to the amendment of this, then we can come back to the passing of this.
Can you make a note on that? Because
Absolutely.
that's a hard cost.
Absolutely. And Ms. Molina, do you have a question on the amendment?
No, Chair, it would be on the, after the amendment, so I'll hold until
Get
then.
back with you. Yep. All a vote for the amendment?
Well, just a clarification. I didn't recall that there was a previous motion made. So you have, this motion in my mind is the original motion. You had a draft, but,
With an amendment.
well, it is.
Earn your money, sir. Do
Yeah, in effect, it's as if you passed out a new version of it at the meeting.
So what's the correct way to do this?
I would just
Motion.
move to adopt or forward what's in the packet, but with
And then make. an-
addition
then
of the
make an amendment.
36.
Savannah, can you reflect that? And Ms. Lewis, are you okay with that? Okay, then at that point, Ms. Molina,
Then you need a motion for the amendment.
no, Mr.
No, the motion by Mr. Surges, Shepro again, the motion by Mr. Surges is to adopt this, what's up on the screen, including the addition of a 36-month or revision
Tail,
of
yep.
36-month grace period. Is that correct? correct?
Correct. A wind down. Yes.
Does it have to be voted on?
But we're in discussion now, so Ms. Molina, and then we'll vote.
The vote would then be to accept this proposed ordinance that will include the 36-month.
Thank you.
Ms. Molina?
Thank you, Chair. I guess the only feedback I would have right now is I want to make sure that this is vetted by our civil division. The last thing I want is for them to review this and say, you know, make changes or corrections, and then it has to come back again to discuss. I know Jamie's been working on this for 8 months. And my other concern is the same as Mr. Sturgis had, is that we don't have control over our elected officials. But the liability still stands with the county. So that's always concerning, that they can make choices outside of or can they make choices outside of this ordinance? And we're still back to square one with the liability of those employees who are living out of state.
Myrna, at some point, we're gonna have to grapple with that one once and for all, but we just keep running from it and
I would urge that this go to the civil division as
absolutely.
quickly as possible.
The
so-
point of moving this past today is to advance this through the committee system. Having the state's attorney with Mr. Shepro here all but assures that this will now go to the civil division for review. So with that, could you please call the roll? Call the vote.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Carver,
Carver, yes.
Tepe,
Except a yes.
Surges.
Surges, yes.
Passes.
New business, item 10A, authorization of renewal of the contract for our health insurance broker and consultant services.
This is for Assured Partners. We did an RFP, and we had two-year contract terms. The first one has expired, and we are taking the second one allowable under our RFP. They're a fantastic partner, and we'd like to renew.
Ms. Lewis motions.
Yes.
Mr. Kenyon,
Second, please.
any discussion? Please call the vote.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Tarver,
Carver, yes.
Tepe,
Except a yes.
Surges.
Surges, yes.
Passes.
Item 10B, resolution approving compensation rate for the American Rescue Plan Program Coordinator position and budget adjustments. Ms. Labrillo, will you bring this one? And I do expect some conversation on this, so.
This certainly isn't my resolution. So I don't know if, Mr. Sanchez or Ms. Von Stock are available to speak to their reasons for it, or if you would like me to summarize what I've heard.
Mr. Sanchez is on remote.
This is Sanchez.
He
I
might be
am
better to
online
speak
and
to it.
available if desired.
Mr. Sanchez, why don't you introduce this and your reasoning for bringing it forward?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sturgis. This is obviously coming from the American Rescue Plan Committee. We have 4 total staff positions, one being our program manager, Ms. Suzanne Fonstock, and the other 3 are underneath her. We started off with 1 employee originally. You all may remember Jenny Smith, who was the secretary for our meetings and did many other things to support the program. We eventually brought her on full time, and we had her at a rate of $31 an hour. Since that happened, we created 2 additional staff positions now for a total of 3 underneath the program manager. Ms. Smith resigned to take another job, and we brought in somebody else that we knew was ready to go to fill her position. And we wanted to bring that person in at the same pay rate. But in that interim period between Jenny Smith becoming full-time and bringing on a new person to replace her, the county, put the compensation policy in place, which created a range, a pay scale range for positions throughout the county, and also with a sort of restriction or constraint that when bringing on a new employee, they would have to come in at no higher than the 75th percentile of the pay rate, unless they were to, this committee would approve going higher than that. In addition, with these two other positions that we have, they are at a lower pay scale than what Ms. Smith was at. And we would like to make all three of those staff positions at the same pay rate. We're going to give them all essentially the same job description. They're going to be doing the same amount of work. One will be trained to run our meetings, do minutes and agendas, but all will be cross-trained to be able to do that. And so what the committee would desire would be, with the permission of this committee, to allow these three positions to be paid at the top of the pay scale, which is that $31 an hour. And the reasons behind that, are multiple, but really it's a tough job market right now. It's hard to hire people. ARPA is a very short-lived program in the grand scheme of things. It's done at the end of 2026 with some small closeout activities that will occur in the first quarter of 2027. Until then, we have multiple projects that are going on at any one time, up to 40, 45, I think, right now, each with their own, constraints and requirements and paperwork, invoicing and things like that, procurement that have to be vetted, that we want our staff to be taken care of. And we want to be very competitive to make sure that we not only can attract candidates, but that we can keep them. We have had some turnover. Again, it's a tough market out there, especially when somebody knows that this job has a very specific period of time. And I think, we're in a kind of a different situation than maybe some of the other departments that are running grant funded programs, in that the work that is to be done has to be done no matter who is doing it. And if we're not paying our own staff, even $31 an hour, we're having to pay our third-party consultant, Ernst & Young, $200 an hour to do the same work. And it's not complicated work. It's work that we need very, detail-oriented and discerning eyes on, and capable hands, but we don't need to pay anyone $200 an hour to do this work. So that's what we're asking, is that we can have your permission to allow these three positions to come in at that $31 an hour rate. So again, to help with not only the recruitment, but the retention of staff, and really put together a very solid team that can just, work at a very high level. Ms. Fonstock is very capable, and I know in her hands, we're building quite a well-oiled machine. So I think that's pretty much the gist of it. And I can answer any questions you may have, but
Mr. Sanchez, thank you. Appreciate that. So I'm often used the word conundrum, and here it presents itself again today.
Should we before we discuss
Put it
motion?
on the floor.
Oh, sure.
Yes, a motion.
Anita Lewis motions for the approval of compensation rate of an American Rescue Plan Program Coordinator position and budget adjustments. Do I hear a second?
Silva seconds.
Silva seconds. Thank you. Open for discussion. The conundrum. I was in full support with Mr. Tepe when we said, gosh darn, we pay a whole boatload of money to these guys at Ernst & Young to do stuff. I was equally in full support of Ms. Labrillo when I said we have to do an equity plan and we have to hold our guns and have teeth into this and make sure that we're not making exceptions. Yet Mr. Sanchez brings us the conundrum saying you can't serve both masters in this case. I can't take it away from Ernst and then go against, our own rules. When I look at this and say, I'm not sure if these are 36 hours a week positions or 40-hour a week positions, but, my math, at the hourly rate, I mean, these are $60,000 a year plus employees that I'm not even quite sure what they're doing, but I am inclined, while I'm happy to add the staff that is needed to get this job done so that it's not going to Ernst & Young, I am not interested, or I would not be supportive of raising the salary that causes the ripple in the pond, which goes against everything that Ms. Hopkinson and Ms. Labrillo have put in order. That's my 2 cents, and I'll open it up to discussion. Anita?
Yeah, so I'm in agreement with the rates that we put in and everything. However, to me, this is almost an ad hoc thing. It's going to be over in 2 years. These are very specific employees just hired for this. They know that they're not going to be here in 2 years. And so I think that finding good employees is going to be hard. So I would actually, as an exception, support the $31 because of those reasons.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Mr. Kenyon?
How does this compare with other salaries here? People doing. the
Ms.
similar
Labrillo or Ms.
job.
Hopkinson, can you speak to that?
I can speak to that. So the range for this position is set, and the $31 represents the absolute top, which means we have a number of other employees doing similarly situated positions who are paid significantly less, who have been here for many years and perform well. That's my biggest concern with it, that as the board has set this policy in place to try to maintain consistency, I understand that this purpose is temporary. However, undoubtedly, if we get amazing administrative staff out of these roles, we have a number of open administrative positions throughout the county at any given point in time. So to, have a work relationship with them, even if they know this job is for a 2-year grant program, understand that they are still regular employees of this county, eligible for unemployment if their position ends. Even if they know it's grant funded, that doesn't mean that they can just be terminated at the end of 2 years and not receive benefits for that. They are still full employees, regardless of if they are in a grant functioning program.
Jamie, can they not just apply for another position within the county, extending their employment?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And
Got
given
experience.
we have a policy that encourages and promotes hiring from within. And, as we all know, good people are hard to find. And if you've spent 2 years working with an excellent employee, I don't believe that, that we would struggle to find them, being that they're administrative positions that translate well
I mean, that's
across.
almost our culture to hire from within, correct?
It is,
That's
and we
part of
now
our
have a-
retention program.
We have a recruitment policy that does now promote and encourage that, and provide an internal only posting period for positions in which the position is only open to internal candidates, specifically for positions like this that are administrative in nature.
Mr. Kenyon?
Met a young lady this morning, and she works in a warehouse that makes meals.
Time were you up this morning? Holy cow.
I was up at 4, but anyway, they make meals and she works in the warehouse and she gets $31 an hour. So it may not be terribly outrageous to have to pay that much.
And certainly that would affect the other employees in the grade as
Yeah.
well. And as we do an external study, if this board would like to raise all the salaries to be more externally competitive, that's certainly an option for this board.
Mr. Roth?
I think committee people should go first. Anita has her.
Okay. So after Jamie explained all that, I'm going to say my first inkling was very wrong. And I'm more with going back to the $25 or whatever it is that's in our.
Mr. Roth?
Um,
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Sorry.
I think we need to use some common sense. If we're paying $200 an hour to E&Y, and then we're paying 36 to have an employee, the savings there, to say, oh, we can't do it because it's above, but we're spending, $140 extra or whatever extra per hour, I think is, we got to be flexible in our, sometimes our things need to be flexible to adapt to reality. Because we spent, what was it, $1.2 million last year with E&Y, and for a lot of it was the admin. And I've been bringing that up since last May. We got to use common sense. I mean, we're short on, we're having to find money to meet our budget. And here now we're willing to spend $140 an hour per hour more.
Did I mention the word conundrum?
I understand, but look at it from a financial point of view. people from the outside are saying, wait a minute. In corporate world, you got to sometimes look at the reality.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Kios.
Just doing a real quick external salary that he brought up there, $31 versus the external is $200 an hour.
Did I
mean,
mention the
that's
word conundrum?
Well, that's the logic
Say enigma.
right there. It is not, it's not actually an internal thing. This is more external. And we haven't done the external yet.
I understand that. My concern on this is setting the precedence to say the ripple effect that occurs from this, is the exception worth it? And Madam Chair, I see your hand. But Mr. State's Attorney, I would ask you, it would be my objective to allow for the additional staff people, but not to breach the 75% mark. How would I effectively do that?
Well, at this point, you could forward it on for a attorney review, and instead of the 31, if you could limit it to the 75%, and that could still be looked at and changed if justified before you got it to the full board, as opposed to just saying no, and then there's nothing moving forward.
Madam Chair?
Hi, thank you. Just some clarification. Because we're looking at different funds that money is coming out of, I don't. Because we're looking at different funds that this money is coming out of, I hate to throw this into the general fund conversation, which if we weren't in the inside and I heard you, I would go, oh my goodness sakes, I agree with you. This is coming out of designated ARPA money, which is that grant fund. So if you choose not to spend it on E&Y, then you're going to be choosing to spend it on a program that Anita Lewis is going to be bringing forward. So it's coming out of that same pool of $103+ million. So we can't throw it into a corporate understanding where it's based on profits and what we're going to be spending. This is separate and unique.
The slippery slope that exists is trying to say that anything that is grant funded rather than general fund is not, should be treated with different rules. And I might suggest taxpayer money is taxpayer money, regardless if that comes from the feds, the state, the county. And that slippery slope is something, again, we dance around. People are afraid to verbalize that. It's a fact. I'm sorry, Mr. Kenyon had a.
Bates,
please. Bates, please.
The salary range that you have, let's say 25 up to 31. So they have the ability, if they can't hire somebody at 25, that they can go higher.
Interesting concept, but I think they already have that.
They do have
Yeah, they
that
do have
already.
that.
Yes, I believe they can
But
go
it
up to
just says-
29.25 by
Or the
compensation
word
policy.
up to, because 31 sounds like a lot.
Ms. Bates, I don't see your hand on the computer, but I heard you. Chime in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Mavis. Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, my opinion as a member of the ARPA committee is that we are hiring these people with the stipulation that this job will not go on forever. And I believe that we would be justified in offering a higher salary because they are taking on the risk of a ended, not an unended, but an ending job. So I think if we're worried about equity, that should be part of the equation, is that these people are accepting a short-term job. They're accepting the risk of having to find another job at the end of 26. So I would like to ask you to do the $31.
Yeah, Mavis, thank you so much for that. Were you online to hear the conversation that the employees can actually stay within the system and apply for another job someplace else?
Yes. Yeah, I've been
Okay, thank you.
listening. Yes.
Myrna, I see your hand.
Thank you, Chair. I'll chime in too. My concern really is our previous employee had the experience I'm not sure how long she was employed for, and got up to the $31 an hour. These employees will be new employees without that experience that I don't think is worth that $31 an hour at this point, especially when every year we're going to be looking at increases or possible increases to these employees. And then we're just going to keep moving that dollar amount higher and higher, leaving other employees who do similar jobs outside of ARPA lagging behind, which I think was the main purpose of this equity study. I would be in favor of topping it at the 70, what was that number? $29 an hour? I mean, that's still a pretty good wage.
I agree. And Miss Molina, thank you for bringing that up. We've spoke, at length with some of the other departments saying, we have staff, engineer level people that have been with us for 20 years that are making X. And now you want to bring on this kid straight out of college at what I'm making or more. Yeah, welcome to the role of being an employer. And it is one of the single largest problems that we have facing us today. It is 10:15. Mr. Roth, is this something new?
Just finishing up the comment. If we're paying E&Y $200 an hour, if it's for a year, that's approximately 2,000 hours, that's 400,000. And we're saying the employer, we're paying 60,000. So that's 140,000 times 3.
I certainly understand.
That's a lot of money that we could use for a program within ARPA instead of paying out to E&Y.
Mr. Roth, I understand, but
And that's where I'm saying common sense. That's a lot of money. Just
genuinely appreciate that and would ask that you look at it from the bigger picture of saying, this is our overall budget and 70% of our revenues go towards salaries, and a small ripple in the pond, a small pebble in the pond creates a large ripple. And I'm so glad we have a Kathy Hopkinson to help us evaluate those ripples and keep us spending within our limits. So with that said,
Mr. Sturgis, if I may.
Oh, yes, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you. Just to kind of, respond to some of the comments. I do think that, we are separate from the general fund, and that should be really at the top of the conversation as well. I know there are other grant funded programs that we have, but those are from departments that have much larger staff that have been more well established and will be still functioning and operating after ARPA is long gone. I think if there's any ripple effect, it's in a pond that is kind of separated from the rest of the lake. I don't find this to be any kind of slippery slope that is going to create some sort of backlash from other departments saying, oh, you did it for ARPA. Well, ARPA is so different from anything else going on at the county. I understand the concept of, I guess you could call it fairness, internal fairness. If we're going to pay this person at this rate to do this type of work, and we're paying a bunch of other people over here a lower rate to do the same amount of work or even more, that there's an issue of fairness there. But in fairness, any of those employees doing more work for less money can apply for ARPA. They can apply for these positions. There's nothing stopping them from coming over to our team. And if they're great workers, we'd be happy to have them. But at the end of the program, then it's up to them to find out what they do next. I do understand, hire from within. So our ARPA staff at the end of the program potentially could find a job elsewhere in the county, maybe. There's no guarantee of that. There's no guarantee that those positions would be available, or positions that they would be qualified or interested in would be available. And even if it's doing something similar at a lower rate, that's still an option that they have. But at the end of the day, we're really we've always existed in this like gray area that is outside of the rest of what the county's doing, all of the other departments. So it's just, to me, comparing it apples to apples with everybody else, it doesn't set well with me, because I really don't see how it is the same. So again, anybody in the county who would want to be paid $31 an hour to do this type of work, they can apply. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. But then at the end of it, they don't have a job. So I'll just leave it with that.
So for the resolution as presented, please call the vote.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, no.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Tarver,
Carver stepped out.
Oh, okay, sorry. Tepe,
Except yes.
Surges,
Surges, no.
passes 3-2.
Mr. Kenyon, could I have a motion to place reports on
I would
file?
like to move we put
By
all the
unanimous
reports on
consent.
file. By unanimous consent.
No motion?
There's no motion.
Not a motion,
No
unanimous. consent.
unanimous consent request without
After
objection.
the third vote, it passed.
Objections?
No.
I see none.
I'd like to move that we adjourn.
No, wait, I have.
No executive section, no public comment. Ms.
Darn.
Lewis?
So before we have that motion to adjourn, something is sticking in my mind. Back when Ms. Abrilla was doing that long presentation, Mr. Kenyon brought up about the travel expenses and the credit card and all those kind of things that we're paying. Not today, but I think it might be worth our while to just look into how much we are actually doing of that. Because that may be quite a big expense to the county that we may not know we're doing. Is that something we could look into?
We can certainly look into that and present some options for consideration to this committee.
Why don't we give a timeline on that? Can you have it for next month?
No, how about within 3 months? Because then when we look at the next budgets, it might be something we want to look
Yeah,
at.
let's not leave it open-ended. Could we?
That's correct. So before the next budgets,
Jamie, is that okay to have in like a 3-month period as
Sure,
we're going into
certainly.
budget cycle?
Absolutely.
Give her
Okay.
something to do in
Why
her
aren't you
spare
trying to
time.
get
Yeah.
this in front of
and if you need help, Mr. Kenyon will help you.
sooner than that?
Not what she's asking.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Mr. Kenyon, warm it up, buddy.
All right, I move we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
And
Second.
Ms. Lewis, second.
Yes, absolutely.
All in favor? Thank you so much. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Thank you.